I never thought one signature could change the course of my life. That day, I walked into my family lawyer's office with a naive confidence, convinced everything I was promised as a child was mine. After all, it was written in the will, or so I thought. The lawyer looked at me with a tight smile, and then, almost casually, he slid a thick envelope across the mahogany desk. My name wasn't on the top of the will. My brother's name gleamed like a neon insult. I felt it immediately, my stomach dropped, my chest tightened, and my hands went clammy. I tried to speak, tried to argue, but the words lodged in my throat. You took it all. I managed finally, my voice barely more than a whisper. My brother smirked from across the room, leaning back as if he'd been expecting this exact reaction. You always were too soft for the family business, he said, voice dripping with that condescending ease I hated since we were kids. Maybe it's time you learned your place. And that's when it hit me, the magnitude of what I'd lost. Everything my parents had worked for, gone. Not stolen by a stranger, but by someone I trusted more than anyone else in the world. Someone I called family. The first weeks were a blur. I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep. Every news article, every property listing, every social media post flaunting his new wealth felt like a punch in my gut. The world was moving forward, but I was frozen in a haze of betrayal and helplessness. I started replaying every conversation, every shared laugh, every family dinner where he smiled while subtly undermining me. It wasn't just greed, it was cruelty. And it was deliberate. Nights were the worst. I'd lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, imagining confrontations I'd never had, ways I could have stopped him, ways I could still make it right. But the voice of logic always cut in. I couldn't fight him head-on, not yet. Not without a plan. Then one evening, as I walked past the family estate, I saw him through the large bay windows, celebrating with friends, champagne in hand, the house I grew up in now completely his. My fists clenched, my vision blurred with a mix of rage and determination. And in that moment, something shifted inside me. I realized that if I wanted justice, if I wanted revenge, I couldn't act recklessly. I had to be smart. I had to be patient. I had to plan. Because revenge, real, satisfying revenge, isn't about anger in the moment. It's about precision. And I was ready to become a master of it. That night, I sat in the shadows of my tiny apartment, sketching maps, taking notes, reading up on property laws, researching every loophole, every weakness, every tiny advantage I could exploit. I promised myself one thing: when the day came, he would regret not just taking what was mine, but underestimating me. Weeks turned into months. Months turned into years. Every day, I disguised my pain, hid my true intentions, and built my life silently, meticulously. Friends laughed at me, calling me too soft or irrelevant, but I let them. Every sneer, every dismissive comment was fuel. And then one evening, as I watched the sunset over the city skyline from my modest apartment, I realized the first step of my plan was almost complete. The first move in a game my brother didn't even know we were playing had been set. He thought he'd won. He thought I'd been defeated. But he had no idea that the Daniel he betrayed years ago was gone. In his place was someone sharper, colder, and infinitely more patient. Someone who never forgot and never forgave. And I knew, when the day came, he would finally see the full measure of what his greed had cost him. I knew I couldn't rush this. Revenge like mine wasn't about confrontation, it was about control. Every step, every move, had to be calculated. I started small. I reconnected with people who had once admired or trusted my brother, friends, business partners, even his lawyer. But I didn't approach them openly. I was careful, subtle, letting them see me as nothing more than that lost brother, the one he had humiliated and dismissed. Every smile I gave them was a mask. Every casual conversation, a seed planted. I learned things about him that weren't in any public record, debts he had hidden, lies he told, cracks in his empire no one else could see. And while the world assumed I was fading into obscurity, I was building. Small investments, quiet business ventures, alliances that no one noticed. I became invisible and dangerous at the same time, like a shadow creeping closer to the moment of reckoning. Then came the night that changed everything. I had tracked one of my brother's most lucrative properties, a mansion he had acquired through underhanded deals. I waited until he left town for a gala, and I walked the perimeter silently, memorizing every entrance, every camera, every guard rotation. I wasn't breaking in, not yet. I was gathering intelligence. That's when it hit me again, the same surge of anger, the same tightness in my chest. But this time, it was different. This wasn't just about rage. This was about justice. And justice, I realized, could taste sweeter than vengeance ever would. Weeks turned into months. Every day I refined my plan. Every night, I replayed scenarios in my head. I visualized his smug face when he realized I had outmaneuvered him. I imagined the courtroom, the board meetings, the public humiliation, the perfection of it all. The people around him, friends, employees, even his family, began to underestimate me. Perfect. That was exactly what I needed. The more he believed I was powerless, the more recklessly he acted. Every mistake he made was a gift. Every betrayal he committed against me in the past became a tool I could use. Then came the first real strike. A minor investment I had made turned into an opportunity to disrupt one of his deals. I didn't do it loudly. I didn't brag. I watched from the shadows as his plans collapsed, his employees scrambled, and he blamed everyone but me. The thrill wasn't in the chaos I caused, it was in the silence of it. He had no idea it was me. He didn't even suspect. And that knowledge, that invisible control I held, gave me a satisfaction I had never known before. And through it all, I kept my promise to myself, patience. Let him grow arrogant, let him flaunt what he thought was untouchable wealth, let him laugh at the soft brother he thought I was. Because the moment of reckoning, my moment, would be perfect. I started keeping a journal. Not of feelings, not of anger, but of details, dates, locations, conversations. Every slip, every miscalculation on his part, I recorded. This would be my blueprint. My revenge would not be messy or rushed. It would be precise, surgical, and undeniable. Then came the night I realized just how close I was to stepping into the light of retribution. I had acquired key allies, people he had wronged, rivals he had underestimated. And now, the first phase of my plan could begin. I smiled to myself, leaning back in the quiet of my apartment. He thought he had won, thought I was irrelevant. But every move I had made, every silent hour spent planning, had led to this. And the best part? He would never see it coming. Daniel had waited years for this moment, but now, the air around him felt electric. Every sound, the faint hum of streetlights, the distant bark of a dog, even the occasional car passing, heightened his awareness. Tonight, the first tangible phase of his revenge would begin. He wasn't going to confront his brother directly, not yet. This wasn't about shouting or anger. It was about precision, about letting every action speak louder than any words ever could. The first target was a minor property deal, a key asset his brother had acquired to show off his wealth and influence. Daniel had quietly infiltrated the deal through a business associate who owed him a favor. No one suspected him. He watched the documents change hands, subtle errors left intentionally, contracts slightly amended. Each tiny disruption was like dropping a grain of sand that would eventually cause an avalanche. Later, Daniel attended a gala, blending into the crowd while keeping a careful eye on his brother. He watched him laugh, toast, and boast about his untouchable empire. The arrogance was intoxicating, perfect. Every boast, every careless smile was a thread Daniel could pull to unravel it all. Back in the safety of his apartment, Daniel mapped the next moves. Every phone call, every meeting, every social engagement his brother had in the coming weeks would be documented. He wasn't just targeting property, he was targeting reputation, alliances, and pride. And then came the night that made his stomach tighten in a different way. One of his brother's closest allies, the kind who believed loyalty meant profit, made a mistake, a slip in judgment that could cost him dearly. Daniel had anticipated this. He reached out discreetly, planting seeds of doubt and misinformation that would slowly poison the relationship. By the time the ally realized something was off, the damage was already done. And Daniel? He watched it all unfold with a mixture of satisfaction and cold detachment. Every misstep by his brother, every crumbling relationship, brought him closer to the moment where his brother would finally understand the cost of betrayal. But it wasn't just about external moves. Daniel also worked on himself, building confidence, skills, and connections that would make him unstoppable when the time came. The boy who once felt powerless was now a strategist, a shadow moving through the world with a purpose no one could see. And yet, with every step, every success, the tension mounted. He knew he had to stay hidden, invisible. One wrong move could ruin everything. Every night, he lay awake rehearsing scenarios, imagining the perfect timing for each strike. He could almost feel the moment he'd confront his brother, not with fists, not with rage, but with undeniable proof of his superiority, patience, and intellect. Then, one quiet evening, Daniel received a tip that his brother had made a critical misstep. The arrogance, the years of underestimating him, had finally created an opening. His heart raced, adrenaline sharp in his veins. This was it, the first real move that would make his brother see that Daniel was no longer the soft, powerless sibling he once was. Daniel smiled to himself, a cold, determined smile. The long game had begun. And once it started, there would be no turning back. Daniel watched from a quiet corner of a nearby cafe, a cup of coffee growing cold in his hands, as the first wave of his revenge hit. His brother, confident, arrogant, and completely oblivious, was now scrambling. It started with a phone call, a business partner yelling, accusing, and panicking over discrepancies Daniel had engineered. A key deal, years in the making, was collapsing. Every misstep he had planted was now blossoming into chaos, and Daniel's pulse quickened. This was the moment he had been waiting for, watching his brother confront consequences he hadn't even imagined. Across the city, his brother paced in his luxurious apartment, phone pressed to his ear, sweat forming at the edges of his hairline. He shouted, demanded explanations, tried to intimidate, but every call, every email Daniel had quietly sent, had eroded the empire from within. Daniel's careful, invisible manipulation had begun to work, and it felt intoxicating. And yet, Daniel remained calm. He didn't gloat, didn't rush in. That wasn't the point. This was about psychological domination, letting the arrogance he had relied on for years crush him. Every miscalculation he had made, every betrayal of trust, was coming back to haunt him. The next day, news spread of a minor scandal, one that seemed unrelated at first, but Daniel knew better. His brother's name was mentioned alongside questionable transactions, disputes, and errors that could no longer be ignored. Even his allies began to question his judgment. The arrogance that had blinded him for so long was cracking, piece by piece. Daniel allowed himself a small smile, almost imperceptible, as he watched from a distance. Every carefully plotted step, every quiet hour of planning, was paying off. The brother who had humiliated him, who had stolen everything, was now vulnerable. And yet, with every success, Daniel's nerves remained taut. He knew this was only the beginning. He had exposed the first cracks, but the final collapse, the humiliation, the total reversal, would require patience, timing, and precision. He couldn't afford mistakes, and the stakes had never been higher. Late that night, Daniel reviewed his plans, tracing every domino that had yet to fall. Each move was calculated, every ally aligned, every leverage point mapped. And in the quiet, a single thought echoed: when the final moment arrived, it wouldn't just be about money or property, it would be about proving, once and for all, that underestimating him had been the biggest mistake of his brother's life. And deep down, Daniel knew the sweetest satisfaction would come not from witnessing his brother lose everything, but from seeing the disbelief and horror in his eyes when he realized just how thoroughly Daniel had outplayed him. The day Daniel had waited for was finally arriving. Months of quiet manipulation, careful alliances, and invisible strikes had led to this moment. The first public confrontation was about to unfold, and he felt a mixture of anticipation and calm, like a predator watching its prey inch closer to a trap. He arrived at the city's grandest law office, blending seamlessly into the crowd. To everyone else, he looked like a quiet businessman attending routine meetings. But behind his composed exterior, every nerve was alive. Every eye contact, every subtle gesture, every whispered word mattered. Across the room, his brother moved with his usual arrogance, unaware of the storm about to engulf him. He laughed, shook hands, and posed for photos, flaunting his empire like a king who believed his throne was untouchable. Daniel took a deep breath and activated the first domino. The documents he had planted, financial discrepancies, fraudulent approvals, and key evidence of mismanagement, were now in the hands of auditors, journalists, and board members. Slowly, quietly, the whispers began. And then, the first tremor of panic. His brother's smile faltered. He glanced at his phone, then at the gathering crowd, as messages and emails arrived simultaneously, notifications of internal investigations, exposed errors, and growing suspicion from partners. The first cracks were showing, and Daniel didn't need to say a word. He walked calmly to a corner and watched as chaos unfolded. Allies who had once praised his brother now questioned him. Employees who had followed orders without thought began to worry. The arrogance that had once blinded him was dissolving in real time. Daniel allowed himself a faint smile. This was more than strategy, it was artistry. Every move had been calculated for maximum psychological impact. The humiliation was public, the stakes were high, and the control rested entirely in his hands. Later that evening, Daniel received a call from one of his carefully placed allies, a confidant who had been feeding him inside information for months. "It's working." "He doesn't know what hit him," the voice whispered. Daniel's lips curled into a satisfied grin. He felt the power surge, not in violence, not in confrontation, but in absolute control. For years, he had been the powerless brother, the one everyone dismissed. But now, the tables were turning, and the man who had stolen everything was beginning to feel the weight of his arrogance. He knew the hardest part was yet to come. The final humiliation, the climax of this long, patient game, would require him to step out of the shadows and deliver the ultimate blow. But for the first time in years, Daniel allowed himself a flicker of triumph. The world was watching, and soon, so would his brother's realization that Daniel had never been powerless at all. And in that quiet, calculated smile, Daniel promised himself one thing: when this was over, there would be no doubt in anyone's mind who had truly won. It was the day Daniel had waited for. Years of careful planning, silent observation, and subtle strikes had led to this single moment. The gala his brother had arrogantly arranged to flaunt his wealth, influence, and untouchable status had become the stage for his downfall. Daniel arrived quietly, dressed impeccably, blending into the crowd. But unlike months ago, he didn't feel invisible. Every eye he passed, every handshake he gave, carried the weight of someone who had been underestimated and had emerged stronger, smarter, and unstoppable. Across the room, his brother stood on a raised platform, raising a glass to toast his empire. His voice rang out, confident, commanding attention. The arrogance had grown over the years, thick and intoxicating. He had no idea what awaited him. And then it began. The first blow was subtle but devastating. An email flashed across the screens in the room, showing financial mismanagement, manipulated contracts, and hidden evidence of deals gone wrong, proof that the empire he so proudly displayed was built on shaky ground. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The whispers grew louder. Daniel's brother froze mid-toast. The second blow was personal. Daniel stepped forward, calm, composed, and utterly commanding. "I believe there are some truths that need to be told tonight," he said, his voice carrying across the room like a bell tolling justice. Every eye turned toward him. Every gaze locked on the brother who had stolen, lied, and underestimated. As Daniel revealed carefully collected evidence, emails, financial discrepancies, witness statements, his brother's face drained of color. He stammered, attempted explanations, tried to deflect blame, but the audience, the investors, and even his closest allies were no longer listening. The foundation he had built on arrogance and betrayal was crumbling in real time. The final strike was psychological, a moment Daniel had saved for last. He recounted the personal betrayals, the humiliation, the stolen inheritance. Every word cut deeper than any financial loss could. The room fell silent, stunned by the sheer precision and cruelty of the revelation, not cruel in malice, but in the perfect justice of it all. His brother's face contorted in disbelief and fury. He opened his mouth to speak, but no one believed him anymore. The empire he had flaunted, the respect he had commanded, the fear he had instilled, it was all gone. And standing there, calm, victorious, Daniel felt a surge of relief, satisfaction, and finally, validation. He had endured ridicule, loss, and pain. He had waited, planned, and executed with patience and precision. And now, in front of everyone, the man who had humiliated him, stolen from him, and underestimated him had fallen. For Daniel, it wasn't just revenge. It was proof that power, patience, and intelligence could topple arrogance. It was proof that betrayal, when met with cunning and resolve, could lead to justice that was both satisfying and absolute. And as he walked out of the gala, the whispers of awe and astonishment trailing behind him, Daniel realized something profound: he was no longer the powerless brother. He was the one who commanded respect, who had the world watching, and who had finally, definitively, won. After the gala, after the chaos and the whispered awe, Daniel walked alone into the quiet night. The city lights shimmered like scattered diamonds, and for the first time in years, he felt unburdened. The revenge had been complete, not messy, not impulsive, but precise, patient, and undeniable. He had taken nothing beyond what was owed, and yet, the satisfaction ran deeper than money or property ever could. It was the knowledge that justice, when executed with patience and intellect, could be both beautiful and devastating. He thought of his brother, the man who had laughed at him, who had stolen from him, who had underestimated him. Daniel didn't feel glee in his downfall, not exactly. What he felt was validation. Proof that resilience, planning, and intelligence could overcome betrayal, greed, and cruelty. And as he looked toward the horizon, Daniel realized something important: revenge is never about instant gratification. It's about the long game, the subtle moves, and the courage to endure while waiting for the perfect moment. For anyone who had been underestimated, dismissed, or betrayed, Daniel's story was a quiet reassurance: power, patience, and strategy could turn the tables in ways that brute anger never could. And for Daniel, the victory was not just in what he had taken back, it was in knowing he had regained himself. Outro call to action: YouTube ready. If this story gave you chills, smash that like button and tell us in the comments what's the most satisfying revenge you've ever witnessed. And of course, subscribe for more stories like this, where justice is patient, precise, and unforgettable. YouTube Shorts version, 3 to 5 minutes. Clipchamp voice options for shorts. Male 1, Joey. Male 2, Max. Male 3, Liam. Short script. I never thought one signature could change my life. My brother took everything, our inheritance, our family trust, and left me with nothing. For months, I watched, I planned, I waited. Every deal he made, every misstep, every betrayal. I noted, memorized, and quietly exploited. He thought I was powerless. He laughed at me, flaunted his wealth, and believed I had faded into obscurity. But I wasn't gone. I was building, learning, waiting for the perfect moment. Then the first cracks appeared, alliances fell apart, deals collapsed, whispers grew louder. And I watched from the shadows as his empire began to unravel. Finally, the gala. The night he proudly showed off everything he had stolen. I revealed the truth, the manipulated contracts, the hidden deals, the betrayals he had ignored. Every eye in the room turned to him. Every ally questioned him. He froze. He stammered. And I walked out, victorious, calm, and finally, validated. He had underestimated me, but now the world knew the truth: Daniel was no longer powerless. And revenge, when done right, is the sweetest victory of all. Hook line for shorts ending. He thought he had won, but the brother he betrayed had been waiting. And now, justice is complete. Even after the public humiliation of his brother, Daniel knew the game was far from over. The visible victories, the collapsing deals, the whispers, the panic, were only the beginning. True revenge required control over the unseen moves, the small, psychological strikes no one noticed but that slowly chipped away at his brother's confidence. Daniel walked through the city streets late at night, his mind replaying years of betrayal. He remembered the birthday party where his brother had subtly insulted him in front of their family. He remembered the late nights when he had begged for fairness, only to be dismissed with a smirk. Every memory fueled the cold determination building inside him. He pulled out his notebook, a map of errors, betrayals, and weaknesses. Each entry wasn't just a note, it was a weapon. Every person he had gathered as an ally had been strategically placed to maximize impact, to tighten the invisible noose around his brother's empire. Tonight, Daniel's focus was personal. He had learned of a social event, a charity gala his brother prided himself on attending yearly. The perfect setting to remind him of who truly controlled the narrative. Daniel smiled, imagining the subtle chaos that could unfold. A misdelivered document here, a carefully planted rumor there, enough to make his brother squirm in front of those he once trusted blindly. As he walked, he felt the familiar rush of anticipation. It wasn't just revenge, it was art. Each carefully executed move brought a sense of satisfaction far beyond anger. This was precision. This was justice served on his terms. And in the quiet of the night, Daniel whispered to himself, he thought he could humiliate me and get away with it. But the real game has only just begun. Daniel watched from the shadows as his brother's world began to crumble, not just financially, but emotionally. He had planted small but devastating errors in key contracts, whispered rumors among associates, and strategically leaked hints of internal betrayals. The subtle chaos was enough to make even the most confident person second-guess everything. At first, his brother tried to maintain control. He barked orders, made threats, and tried to intimidate employees. But cracks were appearing where Daniel had predicted. Partners who once trusted him hesitated. Friends who had celebrated his arrogance now questioned his judgment. Every interaction, every misstep, was feeding Daniel's silent satisfaction. Late one evening, Daniel sat in his apartment, reviewing the week's events. His notebook was filled with diagrams, notes, and plans, all meticulously tracking his brother's reactions. He could see the fear beginning to take root. The man who had laughed in his face years ago now lived in a subtle panic, unsure of whom to trust. Daniel smiled, a quiet, almost imperceptible curve of satisfaction. Patience, he whispered to himself. It's all about patience. The bigger the ego, the harder the fall. He knew the next move had to be psychological, something that would not only humiliate but shake the foundation of his brother's confidence completely. Daniel began planting subtle traps at upcoming events, misfiled documents, carefully leaked information, and unexpected coincidences that would appear as his brother's own mistakes. Each day, Daniel felt the tension building, not in him, but in the man who had once called him weak. He imagined the panic, the sleepless nights, the anxiety building like a storm, perfectly crafted without lifting a finger directly. And yet, Daniel remained calm. His hands didn't shake. His mind didn't waver. He had endured years of betrayal, of being underestimated, of having everything stolen. And now, every small victory, every misstep, every faltering alliance, every whispered doubt, was proof that his patience was paying off. That night, as the city lights flickered outside his window, Daniel wrote in his notebook, he doesn't know who's pulling the strings yet. But soon, he will. The day finally came when Daniel stepped closer to the edge of the shadows. Until now, his revenge had been invisible, subtle missteps, carefully planted evidence, whispers in the right ears. But now, the time had arrived to show his presence directly, to remind his brother that the boy he once dismissed was no longer powerless. It started with a private meeting, one of the rare moments where his brother believed he was in control. Daniel arrived quietly, dressed impeccably, calm and composed, exuding the confidence that had been years in the making. His brother looked up, smirking, expecting to see the timid sibling he had once humiliated. Instead, he met the gaze of a man who had been calculating, patient, and relentless. "Daniel," he asked, the smirk faltering slightly. "What are you doing here?" Daniel smiled faintly. "I thought it was time we had a conversation," he said, his voice measured, controlled. "A conversation about choices and consequences." From there, Daniel methodically unveiled what he had orchestrated: minor public scandals, key deals sabotaged, alliances weakened, and evidence of mismanagement, all done quietly, invisibly, over months. Each revelation was timed to hit psychologically hard, each fact delivered with calm precision. His brother's confidence wavered. He tried to deflect, to blame others, to assert dominance, but it was futile. Every point Daniel made was supported by undeniable evidence, every misstep previously ignored now exposed in vivid detail. Daniel leaned forward slightly, voice cold but steady. "You laughed at me, dismissed me, and stole everything. You underestimated me, thinking I'd never fight back. You were wrong. And now you're seeing the result." For the first time, the brother realized the depth of Daniel's planning. Panic flickered across his face, disbelief mixing with fury. He opened his mouth to argue, to defend, but the weight of years of strategy, patience, and precision crushed him silently. Daniel didn't need to shout, didn't need violence. The humiliation, the control, and the undeniable proof were revenge in its purest form. And for Daniel, the satisfaction was overwhelming, not just because of what his brother had lost, but because he had orchestrated it flawlessly, with patience and intellect. As Daniel left the room, the sense of power and validation was almost intoxicating. He had taken the first step toward ultimate closure. The path ahead was clear: the world would soon see the full measure of his revenge, and his brother would understand completely that underestimating Daniel had been the gravest mistake of his life. The night was electric. Daniel arrived at the charity gala, an event his brother had once used to flaunt his wealth, influence, and untouchable image. This time, however, the stage had shifted. Every move, every whisper, every hidden thread of evidence Daniel had planted was about to come together. As his brother took the stage, smiling confidently, Daniel's plan unfolded like a symphony. First, a series of discreet messages went out to key investors, partners, and media contacts: proof of fraud, hidden debts, and broken deals, all carefully documented over months. Then, subtle rumors, strategically planted online, began surfacing just as cameras turned toward the gala. The reactions were immediate. The crowd's laughter turned to murmurs, murmurs to shocked whispers. His brother's voice faltered mid-sentence, trying to maintain composure as flashes of cameras captured expressions of doubt and confusion from allies he had once considered loyal. Daniel stepped forward, calm, controlled, and entirely in command. "It seems the world deserves to see the truth," he said, his voice echoing through the hall. One by one, he revealed the evidence, the lies, the manipulations, the betrayals. Every board meeting, every contract, every whispered secret came alive before the audience. His brother's smirk vanished. Panic, disbelief, and rage painted his face. He tried to speak, to deflect, to intimidate, but it was too late. Daniel had orchestrated everything perfectly. Every ally, every partner, every investor now knew the truth. The empire that had once seemed untouchable was crumbling in real time, not through chaos, but through meticulously planned precision. And then Daniel delivered the personal blow, the reminder of every insult, every betrayal, every humiliation from the past. Every word cut with surgical precision, leaving no room for denial or deflection. The room fell silent. His brother was exposed, powerless, humiliated, and alone. Daniel didn't gloat, he simply watched, the weight of years of planning, patience, and strategy now fully realized. As he walked away from the gala, Daniel felt a deep sense of satisfaction, not from anger or malice, but from justice achieved. He had endured betrayal, loss, and humiliation. He had been underestimated, dismissed, and discarded. And now, every wrong had been set right, in the most precise and satisfying way possible. For Daniel, this was more than revenge. It was validation. It was proof that patience, intelligence, and calculated precision could triumph over arrogance, greed, and cruelty. And as the city lights flickered outside, Daniel whispered to himself, the world saw the truth. And he finally understood who was truly in control. The morning after the gala, the city buzzed with whispers. Daniel's brother, once untouchable, now moved like a man stripped of his armor. Boardrooms that had once echoed with his authority now questioned every decision he had ever made. Even his closest allies looked at him differently, some with doubt, some with barely concealed fear. Daniel observed it all from a distance, savoring the invisible yet undeniable power he now wielded. He didn't need to gloat, chaos was its own reward. The public humiliation, the collapse of reputation, the silent dread in his brother's eyes, it was the perfect payoff. But Daniel knew better than to assume victory was permanent. The man who had stolen everything once could strike again. For now, Daniel's focus shifted inward. He strengthened alliances, double-checked every network he had built, and ensured every leverage point was secured. This was the quiet work of a strategist who understood that revenge was only complete when there was no way back for the opponent. Yet amidst the satisfaction, there was reflection. He remembered every insult, every betrayal, every moment he had been dismissed. And he realized something important: revenge isn't about destruction alone, it's about reclaiming yourself, proving your worth, and taking control of your own narrative. By nightfall, Daniel walked through the city streets, unnoticed yet omnipresent in the memory of those who had once dismissed him. His brother was no longer a threat in the immediate sense, but the shadow of Daniel's patience and planning would follow him forever. And Daniel smiled quietly to himself, a faint, chilling grin. I waited. I planned. I acted. And now, no one, not even him, can forget who I truly am. The weeks after the gala were quiet, but beneath the calm, the world had shifted entirely. Daniel's brother, once untouchable and arrogant, moved cautiously now. Every glance over the shoulder, every hesitant handshake, every worried phone call reminded him of the invisible web Daniel had spun. Daniel, meanwhile, had reclaimed more than just his lost inheritance. He had reclaimed himself. Years of humiliation, betrayal, and powerlessness had forged him into someone unstoppable, patient, and precise. Every move he had made, every domino he had set in motion, had led to this moment, final closure. He walked through his city with quiet confidence. The empire his brother had built was fractured, alliances had crumbled, and trust was gone. And yet Daniel didn't revel in cruelty, his satisfaction was in justice, in the poetic balance of years of patience paying off. His brother tried one last desperate attempt to confront him, an unplanned meeting, a plea, a hint of anger, but Daniel remained calm. It's over, he said simply. Every wrong has been set right. Every betrayal accounted for. And now, you understand. The words sank in like stones in water. There was no escape, no denial, no further deflection. Daniel's brother realized fully what he had underestimated: patience, strategy, and resilience. Daniel had not only survived, he had triumphed beyond imagination. As he left, Daniel glanced at the city skyline. The long nights, the planning, the hidden strikes, all of it had been worth this moment. He was no longer the powerless brother, the one dismissed and ignored. He was Daniel, the strategist, the victor, the one who had rewritten the rules of the game. And in that quiet triumph, he felt something profound: revenge was never about anger alone, it was about reclaiming power, dignity, and control. For Daniel, the story ended here. The brother who had tried to break him would remember this for the rest of his life, and Daniel would carry forward with the unshakable knowledge that justice, patience, and intelligence could always prevail. The end. Thanks for watching.